her dedicated hard work on this really challenging but very important issue. And can I also commend the member for Strangford for securing this debate, and also very much support what he has said in particular regarding targeted religious minorities, which I want to focus on in my speech, particularly because I am concerned about these in my role as the Prime Minister's envoy for freedom of religion or belief. In the penultimate PMQs before Christmas, I asked the Prime Minister whether the promised gift of resettlement for Afghans who are members of religious minorities would be available by the end of Christmas. Well, if I am right, last night was 12th night. And so, being generous, may I give the Minister the benefit of the extra day and say thank you for getting the ACRS up and running now. However, I note that it is only from spring that the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees will refer refugees to the scheme based on assessments of protection need. That sounds more like a Coptic Christmas timeline to me. But more seriously, the delay in providing refuge and support for vulnerable religious minorities does concern me. And I know it concerns many of my colleagues on the organisation that I as the Prime Minister's envoy, am a member of. This is the 33-country alliance of envoys called the International Religious Freedom or Belief Alliance. And they issued a statement in support of vulnerable individuals being targeted in Afghanistan because of their faith or belief. And I commend that to the Minister, not least because it demonstrates that there are international partners who most seriously do share our concerns about the vulnerable situation of those being targeted for their beliefs in Afghanistan. I'll just read a little from it. We hold grave concerns for members of religious minority groups who are at risk, including Shia and Ismaili Muslims, Hazaras, Hindus, Sikhs, Christians, non-believers and others. We call upon all parties and international agencies to recognise the vulnerabilities of these individuals being targeted because of their faith or belief. And it goes on to call, amongst other things, for a renewed humanitarian effort by the international community. And so I was interested and indeed noted today in the Minister's statement that she referred to the scale of the challenge here and the need to coordinate closely with international partners, as indeed the Alliance has done. It was very encouraging during the preparation of that statement that two Alliance countries, the US and Brazil, actually got together. One supplied a plane, the other supplied the visas, and they were able to fly out 193 members of religious minorities from Afghanistan. And it's that kind of international cooperation that I'm sure the Minister is speaking of. But could I ask her, please, for more information as to how the UK is doing this and how we can fulfil this URBFA statement intent? Can I now say that I have, of course, spoken directly, as I know many colleagues have, to members of several religious communities, so I won't go into detail as to the concerns that I share of the risks that there are to them. But I'm pleased that the Government has rightly included religious minorities in the criteria for eligibility for the ACRS, and I was pleased today in the House to hear the Minister's assurance that it is open now to vulnerable religious minorities, which could be combined with community sponsorship, and I'll speak about that a little shortly further. But firstly, with regard to the UNHCR refugee referral scheme starting in the spring, could the Minister clarify that it is based on the Government's announced eligibility criteria, which specifically includes minority groups, and that it's not wholly delegated to the UNHCR's assessments of protection need? In terms of protection services, the principle of non-discrimination prevents UNHCR from specifically targeting minority groups. So it means that arguably members of the LGBT community who were rightly evacuated under the ARAP scheme may well not have been eligible under the UNHCR scheme. And a further concern regarding this scheme is that religious belief is not actually a specific UNHCR eligibility criteria, nor an automatic indicator of need in its own right. And this has led to past criticism of the operation of the Syrian resettlement scheme when it came to resettling religious minorities in the UK, and specifically Christians. And bear with me, Madam Chairman, if you will, because I just want to quote some figures which really bear this out. In 2017, the Barnabas Fund obtained data which revealed that in 2015, out of 2,637 individuals recommended to the UK by the UNHCR for resettlement, only 43 were Christians, even though Christians are widely accepted as constituting 10% of Syria's pre-war population. Only one was Shia, estimated to be 1.5% of the population, and only 13 were Yazidis. The following year, 2016, out of 7,499 individuals recommended to the UK by the UNHCR for resettlement, only 27 were Christians, 13 Shia, and 5 Yazidis. And interestingly enough, it's estimated that the Syria's pre-war population was 74% Sunni Muslim, 13% Shia and Alawite, 10% Christian, 3% Druze, and an estimated 70,000 Yazidis. Now, when it comes to the ACRS scheme, the government has made minority groups a specific eligibility criteria consistent with the new plan for immigration. And I want to quote the wording of that because, for the record, that it is good wording and it's clear. And it says this: we will also ensure our resettlement offer encompasses persecuted refugees from a broader range of minority groups, including, for example, Christians in some parts of the world. We know that across the globe there are minority groups that are systematically persecuted for their gender, religion or belief, and we want to ensure our resettlement offer properly reflects these groups. We will strengthen our engagement with global charities and international partners to ensure that minority groups facing persecution are able to be referred so that their case can be considered for resettlement in the UK more easily. End of quote. So although the Minister's earlier response today to my question gave me hope, I would like more information about how this new plan is going to be put into implementation, particularly because actually I'm not personally aware of the evacuation of any individuals into the UK who have been targeted specifically because of their religion to date. And despite good intentions, there is a real concern that religious minorities will still not be included in the ACRS in the spring, or indeed in the first year of the scheme's operation, if it is based solely on the UNHCR protection criteria. But the Home Office doesn't have to rely solely on the UNHCR for resettlement assessment. It could conduct such assessment itself. As it's clear in the case of Afghans in Afghanistan, UNHCR doesn't have a mandate to deal with their situation, but only if they were to arrive, for example, in Pakistan, which is both risky and causes many other challenges. But the assessment could be done by the Home Office in-house, as it is currently being done in cases of some asylum applications, and can be assisted by trusted partner organisations. Now, can I turn now, as I said I would, to the community sponsorship scheme and suggest that a way to harness the government's commitment to this, which is also welcomed by the UNHCR, and would provide a bespoke legal route of resettlement for religious communities, is to look at the Canadian scheme of community sponsorship for resettlement. Very substantial numbers of refugees have been resettled as a result of that scheme, which involved, in supporting it, close to 2 million adult Canadians. They supported their local community sponsorship of Syrian refugees, many of which were survivors of violence or torture, whose life, liberty, safety or under fundamental rights were at risk. Many were vulnerable women or girls. But 2/3 of the resettled refugees coming to Canada were privately sponsored by Canadian citizens under that scheme. And recent research suggests that comparative data emanating from this programme over the past 40 years demonstrates that sponsored refugees have better and quicker integration outcomes than refugees settled through more traditional government schemes. And I will conclude very shortly, Madam Chair.
more speaker, I'd be really grateful
I certainly
to
will
fit
do.
in.
So could I suggest, therefore, Minister, that we consider the main elements of the Canadian community sponsorship model and see as to how we could adopt this within the UK? And could I ask for a meeting to discuss this? And finally, could I just place on record, Madam Chairman, my commendation of the volunteers within my constituency, the Welcome Churches from Sandbach and the LOL Foundation from Congleton, who've done so much to help support the Afghan refugees in Sandbach.